What's going on, guys? Dan from SSG bringing you another Edison format match. This time we have myself on the left playing Diva Frog Monarchs and Rob on the right playing Vayu Turbo. And look at that, Diva on turn 1. Diva, just really powerful card, right? It can be this extending combo piece late in the game, but also just very versatile, just summoning down on turn 1 to take the board, establish, and make Rob have to deal with something as I go and fetch out a Mermaid Archer. Mermaid Archer, really strong card in these frog style Diva decks because you can easily just normal summon it as a 2000 stick. When you have Treeborn coming back from grave and you can attach it. And Rob playing the Vayu deck, it's a little bit more of a committed Vayu deck with Raikos and Hamsters, Caiuses, of course trying to max out on Dark Refer as well. So not too many like Boras or anything like that, but really more of a controlling aggro kind of, control aggro I guess is how I would describe it, Vayu deck. And we have Magical Android coming down, gaining 600 in the end phase, and Rob going to his turn and immediately activating Upstart Goblin. So life points swinging around already, even though no one has declared an attack. And look, we already have a life total discrepancy this early in the game, as I should be at 9,600. I think I minus tip action it, but I'm pretty sure we get to fix that right away. Gaining 600 off the Magical Android in the end phase for each Psychic monster, and then the Upstart Goblin bringing me up to 96, which is a pretty solid life total to start the game off with, especially when you have an established Magical Android right at the start of the game on turn 1. So let's see how Rob is going to interact here, see what he's going to be able to do. There's a few normal summons that are powerful for Rob in the deck, things like Dark Refer, Armageddonite, but this time he opts for a set monster as well as a set spell or trap, so he's hopefully looking for a Hamster or a Raiko here. I draw for turn and immediately attack into that Raiko with the Magical Android, so easy solve for Rob. He's going to mill over a couple of spell cards and a Dark Refer into his graveyard, so no Vayu pieces in the grave yet. And it looks like I set a back row before ending my turn, so Rob is going to draw for turn here, just 2 back rows in play, 1 on each side. And Rob is now going to activate Armageddonite's effect, using his normal summon to bring the Armageddonite down. Really strong establishing creature in this spot, because you don't really want to commit too much to the board, just going to get some value, get something in the graveyard, get your Vayu pieces going. And it looks like we are sending Vayu. So, very strong here, Rob looking to get his graveyard set up very early in the game, and hopefully attack down into the back row, see what I'm working with as well. Armageddonite, just really strong card in Edison. Kind of can be a Stratos at times, just getting an inherent +1 with the normal summon. This time there's no Sirocco in the graveyard, so we can't just turbo out the Armwing, but nonetheless, Armageddonite will declare an attack for 1400, bringing me down to 82. So back down to a normal-ish life total, 8200 to 8000. And just look back and forth, right? Both players doing good things here. Rob ending his turn, I'm going to Wing Blast the back row, it looks like, by discarding Treeborn Frog. So now my engine's going with the Treeborn Frog in the graveyard. Treeborn Frog is going to come out in the standby phase. And an ideal sack for Caius would be pretty awesome here. Just banishing that Armageddonite and attacking, essentially dealing 400 points of damage to the 1000 from the Caius and the 24 direct. But it looks like I'm thinking about my plays here, so we're going to see how many options I have available to me and which one I'm going to choose. The Diva Frog deck just has a lot of different options. I mean, if I summon a Diva here or a Substitoad, really strong in this spot. I think that you always want to be doing this when you can, getting the full Substitoad combo. And all you need is one other monster to get through your entire deck of frogs, and this just really thins out your deck, leaves only powerful cards here as we cycle through swap frogs. The swaps generally send these Substitoads to the grave just to get them out of the deck, since you can't access them out of the deck from Substitoad. Swap frog will just send the Substitoads first, and so we're going to get all 3 swaps, swap, and just get through the deck. And it looks like the second Treeborn gets in the grave now, and then we go for a dupe block. So ending on two dupe frogs, making Rob unable to attack. And I'm sure if anyone has been playing Edison, they know how the dupe block works. It's a very powerful control piece where the opponent is not allowed to declare an attack on a monster that is named Swap Frog. So essentially, you can't attack either of them. Pretty interesting to both force you to attack one another, and that doesn't work. You cannot do that. So very strong defensive piece here. Allows the frog decks to gain some card advantage and kind of just slow the game down to a complete halt. Make your opponent deal with floating frogs too. You know, if they have to commit something here, the frogs will just replace themselves. And very powerful defensive setup here, and it looks like it's going to work against Rob as he sets a back row here and passes his turn. So with Treeborn Frog in the graveyard, this is how the frog decks gain card advantage. Just getting that Treeborn back every turn and finding a way to use it is just going to be very, very valuable when your opponent can't really progress their game plan through the wall of 2 dupe frogs. And here we go. So we have a tribute summon for Ryza here, and let's see what I target. It looks like I target the back row, and Rob just chains Bottomless, so me not wanting to put Armageddon Knight to the top of the deck because it will just be normal summoned and send a Sirocco to make that Vayu live in the graveyard, electing to get the back row, but Bottomless just a clean answer 1 for 1, so Rob trading cards here. I think overall trading cards is going to be favorable for the Diva Frog deck in the long run. But it looks like Rob's going to get another Dark into the graveyard with another copy of Armageddon Knight. I believe there are 2 copies of Armageddon in this list. It's a list that I worked on a little bit. I think it needs a little bit of work. But fairly strong deck, and it's very linear. As you can see, Rob's game plan is very, very linear and on point, just looking to get aggressive, looking to get the graveyard filled. And also just setting up, right? If no one's progressing in this board state, then just getting the graveyard filled is very good, because when someone is forced to commit into a play, or Rob is going to attack through those dupe frogs, he's going to have the extra resources in his graveyard to maybe grind out and outlast the frog deck on the left. So let's see what the follow-up play is here for Rob. Potentially he's just going to pass and not really do anything. I think he could, set up back row. Something like a Wing Blast could get one of those dupe frogs away. So there are a few different options here. You could summon the Armed Wing out of the graveyard. Maybe try and get rid of a dupe frog somehow with some other extending spell, like a Smashing Ground. Wouldn't be ideal for card advantage, but oh, well, there's a Dark Arm Dragon, so it looks like we do have some sort of extending play here. And Rob has a Dark Arm Dragon, he has Vayu and Sirocco in the graveyard. This is kind of the power of the deck, as it kind of can just go off out of nowhere. And this is really what, turn 3? This is Rob's 3rd turn. All he's done is set up his grave, and now he just has Dark Arm live with an activation of Vayu as well. So let's see what he exactly commits to here. I think it's a little tricky to commit into these 2 dupe frogs, because they just, when they popped, you get to add from grave to hand. They kind of replace themselves. However, I think Rob does want to be aggressive and just kind of get rid of the lock, force me to have something in the spot. And we have Dark Arm popping one of those frogs, and gonna go and grab back the Swap Frog from grave to hand, which is generally just the best one to add back for the most part. Just, it's one of the ones that can be special summons, it can combo with Diva, things like that. Dark Arm just really strong, I think. It's not being super insane right now, but it's gonna be able to break up a dupe lock, and you have to do what you have to do. I think the dupe lock is really strong for these frog decks. It just creates so much card advantage over time, and you don't really feel good playing into it in any situation. So I think Rob being aggressive here is really strong, because I have to have some sort of defensive option to come back in the game if Rob is going to try and make a game push or some sort of aggressive strategy. And he even goes for the Armed Wing out of the graveyard, so removing that Vayu and the Sirocco to summon the level 6 Blackwing Synchro. And no effect on the Armed Wing, but it will declare an attack. And the frog will add a frog back as well, so dupe block really strong, right? Even when it gets broken, most of the time you're going to get 1 to 2 cards back, and this time another Swap Frog goes back, so really strong there. And Rob has 3 attackers now, and we're going to have 1400 direct. And a Tragodia comes down. So this is exactly what I was talking about, having one of these defensive cards that can really help flip the tempo and try to break through this huge board that Rob has. And Tragodia comes down after taking the 1400s. Now I'm at 68, a fairly high life total for facing down a board like this. And counting out the cards in hand, I mean, the Tragodia is just going to be a big threat. I don't think Dark Arm can deal with it. I think it's something like 3,000. As the Dupe Frog just added 2 cards to hand from the graveyard, it fueled that Tragodia just to be a huge threat, and Rob's not going to be able to attack over it this turn as he sets 2 back rows. And 2 back rows with this board can be fairly strong, right? Things like Royal Oppression, things like Attacked Icarus if he has that live, but we have Trueborn Frog coming out of the graveyard here during the standby phase, and Tragodia on board. So a lot of things can happen, right? You could like discard a Caius to take the Armed Wing, start doing some nasty stuff like that. Tragodia can just turn to attack positions, attempt to attack over the Dark Arm Dragon, just to apply pressure to Rob's back rows. There's a lot of interesting things and positions like this that you have to consider. Especially with a powerful card like Tragodia, and it looks like I drop a Dark Dust Spirit, which is like one of my favorite tech cards in any Treeborn Frog Monarch based deck. I always play one, and look, it resolves here, just completely wiping the board. All monsters just going in the graveyard, and then a declaration of attack for 22, and Rob takes the 22. So to me, this kind of smells like Rob has a Royal Oppression, right? Because as the Dark Dust Spirit goes back to hand and goes to Rob's turn, he activates an Upstart Goblin. Like, it just seems like Rob has an oppression in that spot based on how the turn played out, and now we have a pass to turn back to me as well. And Treeborn Frog out of the graveyard, Rob with 2 back rows, and I think not many resources in hand, right? He normal summoned the Armageddon, he normal summoned 2 Armageddons actually, he committed the Dark Arm Dragon to the board, so a few cards coming down out of Rob's hand here. And Dark Dust Spirit just kind of punishing just a very powerful card in that spot. And Royal Oppression, a card that like can't really interact with that type of thing, which I think that's why Rob has. And now we have a normal summon of Swap Frog attacking here, down for 1,000 to 4,800. And I think this is one of the problems with the Frog deck. Once they have card advantage and control, if you don't have like Monarch after Monarch, it actually can be pretty hard to kill your opponent. But I think having all the frogs out of the deck due to the Substitute combo makes it so that you have a high likelihood to actually kill your opponent and draw really powerful cards. But Rob opens up brain control here, and he's going to pay 800 to take that Swap Frog and sacrifice, banishing the Treeborn. So pretty decent response here as Rob's going to attack me down by 2,400. And now we're on 54. So now the Caius in 2 back rows. So Rob's still sitting with those 2 back rows there. I wonder what exactly it could be as the second Treeborn Frog comes out of the graveyard. Of course, Treeborn is limited to 2 in this format, just a really, really powerful card. And you have a lot of access to it due to the Substitute and Swap Frogs just essentially being 8 copies of Treeborn in the deck. But here comes the Dark Dust Spirit again. It destroys the Caius and attacks direct. Another 22, and look, like Dark Dust Spirit is just putting in so much work in this matchup. Rob just doesn't seem to have an answer for it. And Rob is now at 18. One more hit from the Dark Dust Spirit will be lethal. And looks like I had a discard to hand size, and that was a Swap Frog going away. Rob setting a monster on his turn and passing. Treeborn Frog comes back out of the graveyard. And then we have a sack for Caius targeting the monster. Monster gets banished, and Caius attacks directly for lethal. And of course, yeah, there was a Royal Oppression there, so I didn't remember that from when we played, but just based on how the turns played out, you can tell that Rob had an oppression there. It doesn't really stop Treeborn Frog, so it didn't really do much in that spot, and it allowed the Dark Dust Spirit to just come down and just wipe the board. And unfortunate for Rob that I had the one of Dark Dust Spirit in that spot, but that's why we play it. It's a very powerful card, and I highly recommend you guys playing at least 1 copy, and I like to side the second as well. Just really, really powerful in all these like Frog Monarch based decks. And looks like Rob opens up with Charged Light Brigade and adding that Raikou to hand. Raikou not the best in this matchup because when you set it, it can easily get returned to the top of the deck with Ryza or banished with Caius before it can actually pop. But I think early in the game it's actually decent as it can just mill early, and sometimes you can kill something, and we have a Swap Frog coming down here. It's really good against the Diva synchros as well when you commit to a card like Android or something like that, or Catastor. That's when the Raikou can be relevant in this matchup. And we have Treebone Frog going to the graveyard. So good start for Diva Frogs getting a Treeborn in the grave. Looks like I'm going to add that swap back to my hand via its effect. So both decks going online as Rob sets another face down monster. So most likely he has a Hamster or a Raikou or both in this spot. And I think like adding more defense position monsters to the board is just fine. And it looks like I don't have some sort of Caius to drop, so I'm just gonna Swap Frog and send a Substitute to the graveyard. Interesting play when you send Substitute, I think. It generally means that you have access to salvage in hand, so you can go search that Substitute essentially to your hand. And I do declare an attack with the Swap Frog, and Rob is gonna mill with that Raikou, milling a Sirocco into the grave, so that's pretty strong. Just getting one half of your combo into the graveyard for free while interacting with the opponent is very strong, and that's sort of the power of Raikou. And I think because I know that's Raikou, I want to attack into that Raikou with the Swap Frog and pass over. And Rob sets another phase down monster, so no Armageddon Knight there, which is pretty unfortunate as he could have been able to commit to the board, summon an Armageddon out of his graveyard. We haven't seen Dark Grepher either, which is a very strong card in this matchup, just applying maximum pressure on the Frog deck and forcing them to have multiple Caiuses to get out of positions like that. So now we have the Substitute coming down in combination with the Treeborn out of the graveyard. So, and a Soul Exchange. Really sweet here. Soul Exchange being able to turn on the Substitute by tributing Rob's monster. Really, really strong, and it just nets you an additional monster so that you can set up an easy Swap Frog bounce loop or something like that. And having that third monster is a really big deal in a lot of matchups, but also just in general. The Frog Engine, just having that extra monster in play for the Substitute combo is going to do a lot of work here. And being able to deny Rob the Raikou mill and the Raikou value, you know, really strong. Soul Exchange is a really strong card in my opinion. I think it's a little bit underplayed, and I really appreciate List Step even go up to 3 on this because I think it's just a really powerful card. Looks like we're going to get Swap Frog, of course, just going to get all those frogs out of the deck once again. And the deck is really consistent at doing this. I think that's why it's really popular. The Frog Engine is very popular because you just thin out your deck and you get to fill it with very powerful things. And looks like we're going to go for a dupe here out of the hand, and then a dupe from the deck here. So interesting play. You have to bounce a Swap Frog back, normal summon the dupe with your additional normal summon. So you have like a weird dupe block where one's an attack and one's a defense. But nonetheless, it's still a dupe block, and Rob cannot declare an attack right now. I think I'm just explaining to Rob that having that extra monster is really good, because you can now protect them from battle as well if something goes awry. And we have a flip of Hamster here, so Rob just getting that value, making sure he gets his value before he gets something like Caius away. So flipping that Hamster up. And having that Substitute protects against cards like Caius, right? If he drops a Caius right here, it's going to banish one of the dupe frogs, and then he can still only declare an attack on dupe frog. But it won't be destroyed by battle due to Substitute's effect. And we have Upstart Goblin. Upstarts are so strong, keeping these decks very consistent, keeping the opponent on their toes. Always got to be ready to add that 1,000 to your life total, as a lot of people are playing Upstart right now, and I think it's just really strong. And Very, very powerful card that can just make decks so consistent. And we have Treebone Frog coming out of the graveyard once again. Now we have 4 frog monsters in play. And we're going to see what we're going to do with them, as Rob does have a fairly defensive setup here. He has some card advantage. He has potentially multiple Raikou set. He could have another hamster set as well. So a lot of interesting things going on. And we need to be able to drop a Ryza onto that defense position monster. And Rob responds with Bottomless, just getting rid of that. But the monster does go to the top of the deck. Now we have defense position for our frogs. And I like the Bottomless from Rob, even though he's going down a card. Just getting rid of it, making it so maybe I don't have another Monarch, right? And now we have Trap Dust Shoot coming in. So Trap Dust Shoot in the standby phase. And we're looking at a hand of 2 Salvage, Pot of Avarice, Dark Dust Spirit, as well as 2 Swap Frogs. So fairly strong hand, right? You have multiple card advantage spells. You have 3 +1 type spells, just Pot of Avarice, the 2 Salvage, and then you have like extending plays with the 2 Swap Frogs, as well as the Dark Dust Spirit as well. And Rob elects to take the Dark Dust Spirit, and I kind of like that in this spot. I think it's the only like card that's different. If I still have access to that Swap Frog via Salvage anyway, if he were to take one of those. So just getting more frogs out of the graveyard. So I think just taking the Dark Dust Spirit is probably the most powerful card in the hand. And but Rob can't be happy looking at that type of hand with so much card advantage built in. Now we're going to change the frogs to attack position and start attacking down, because we just want to see what those resources are as Rob mills over a Sirocco into the graveyard with the Raikou. And I remember like thinking about this play for a while, because we have the salvages, right? So we have ways to get the Dupluck back into play and just kind of get rid of Rob's monsters for the cost of like pretty much nothing at all. And I like doing this sometimes, as salvage just gained your card advantage back anyway, so you can kind of trade these like small frog monsters for actual cards sometimes. And here we do have the salvage coming down and adding the dupe frog back, as well as the swap frog. So I think it's a fairly interesting play. You don't really attack with Treebone Frog too often, right? But I think just getting into those Raikous and forcing the mills can be very strong, and just sort of pressing the issue, right? And I typically like making these type of plays against a deck like Vayu, right? Because they're really going to need to have like multiple Caiuses or like a Dark Arm Dragon to actually break the board in response when you commit to attacking into these face down monsters, as you can just keep putting up the dupe block back into play, and like it doesn't really cost you anything to flip those monsters over and just let them do what they're supposed to do, right? Now we have a normal summon of Swap Frog and a return to hand and a normal summon of Dupe Frog. I remember thinking about this after in the game, like, why did I do that? I could have just normal summoned the Dupe Frog anyway. So pretty funny there. But another upstart from Rob, thinning out that deck, looking for an answer here. And now he's looking in his graveyard, so what's going to come out of that grave? Something like a Plague Spitter Zombie could help a lot in this spot. I think just maybe trying to Bryonic the dupe lock away, but even that, it just gives the dupe lock player like so much more like card advantage just back to the hand, and you can easily summon them back out. So I think Rob is in a fairly tough spot here, and you'd just much rather have the dupe lock in play than the Hamster and Raikou here. But we're going to see what Rob can do to sort of combat this play here and see exactly what's going on, as both players are at very high life totals, right? Rob hasn't been touched yet. He's still 8,000, which I think is pretty hard. Like, the frog deck can like not kill you that easily, right? Because it's kind of dirtling around with these frog creatures. But I think that Rob's deck does have a better potential for killing out of nowhere. Although 10,000 might be a little bit of a high ask there. And we have a normal summon of Swap Frog now, and Rob adding a back row on his turn, as well as changing that hamster to defense position. And we have Torrential, so completely wiping out everything here. So Torrential, easy way to get rid of everything, right? But I felt the need to summon that Swap Frog out to get the game plan rolling and just start attacking, right? At least attack down the right, go do something progressive on the turn. And it looks like Dupe Frog is going to add back a Swap Frog, but you can only do one because the second one will miss timing. And now we have Pot of Avarice, and this is just the strength of the deck, right? Like, we've done so much with these frog cards, like just stalled the game out to nothing, started attacking with them for like micro card advantage, and now that Rob had an answer finally, we have Pot of Avarice just putting everything back and gaining more card advantage, and just really powerful in this spot. And I like Avarice in these frog decks because it's so easy to set up. You know, once you have Treeborn in the grave coming back, one Substitute and your entire deck is in the graveyard. And Pot of Avarice, you can even do it mid-combo, so you can put everything back while you still have the Substitute active. Put everything back, draw 2, and then just keep thinning out the deck and put the frogs back that you in the graveyard that you just had put back into the deck, and making the Avarice essentially a Pot of Greed a lot of the time. And it's kind of going to be a Pot of Greed here, as Rob is just very low in cards, and having an extra card in this spot for the for myself on the left is just going to be really powerful. But it looks like you have a set back row and pass, so actually still doing nothing here, and Rob immediately flips Heavy Storm waiting for a target, and it just resolves. Heavy Storm not the best in this matchup, but I think you can keep it in to get rid of those Wing Blasts, as Wing Blast can just be very powerful and very strong, and just you just don't want your Rykos to be Wing Blasted. And Rob now has an Armageddon Knight, so Rob not giving up, right? He still has a big graveyard, and he's going to add to it here with the Armageddon Knight. For instance, like say I was at 8,000 or something and Rob had built up a bigger graveyard during the dupe block. I mean, he could easily just kind of OTK me here if I don't have something like a Gores or a Tragodia. So I think that playing very wisely while your opponent has a dupe block is very important, and not just like setting cards and not really committing too much. You know, I think it is important here, as Rob is now activating a Vayu out of the graveyard, summoning out that Armed Wing, just looking to apply some pressure. And I like it, you know, like force me to have something. I know I just drew a bunch of cards, a Pot of Avarice and whatnot, but just get on the aggression, and hopefully I don't have an answer, right? I think that's the thing you can really hope for. And looks like Rob is going to declare an attack with the Armageddon Knight, of course, first. So he's playing around the Gores there. And now the Armed Wing comes down, and the Gores does come down. So yeah, this is just really tough for Rob. I mean, when you gain that many cards while and during the dupe block, it can be very hard for any deck to really grind out. And like the odds that I have Gores is just higher because I drew multiple cards, you know. So I think really strong and interesting token there. It's like the only Digimon card I think that I own. I think it was just given to me by someone because like they thought it looked cool. They're like, you can have this. I think it's like Bulkymon, but it just happened to be on my desk, so we grabbed that and used that for our 2300 Gores token. I think I even checked the back of the card there, just like, is this a Digimon card? Because I didn't even know, which is pretty funny. But Gores is just going to be awesome in this spot. You know, it's Gores. This is exactly what Gores does. It just completely flips the tempo of the game, and now I have two big monsters in play when Rob only has one, and it's just going to be tough here. However, I don't really think this game is over, because Rob does have access to that Plague Spreader zombie in the graveyard that he sent there with Armageddon Knight, and I think it's just like, it just gives Rob a play, right? I mean, something like a Dark End Dragon here could be really strong, just getting rid of the Gores, maybe setting a back row. Because really, if he answers the Gores on the token, I still have to have an out, right? I mean, 6,300 is a fairly high life total, but I mean, I'm still gonna die pretty quickly to 2 attacks, you know, like from both of these monsters. So making a level 8 synchro can be pretty strong, and if he does, I'm still forced to answer it. You know, I'm still forced to have like a Caius or something. So we do have Plague Spitter coming back by putting a card on top of the deck, and Colossal Fighter coming down. So yeah, Colossal, I just like this play a lot, right? I think that it just forces me to have something. I think Rob is playing pretty smart here, just forcing me to answer the Colossal, as the Gorse tokens really don't do that. And True One Frog comes down now, out of the graveyard. And it's Caius, and I remember I telling Rob this, that I completely top decked the Caius, and if I didn't have the Caius off the top of the deck, that I wouldn't have actually had an answer to the Gorse, to the Colossal Fighter. And Rob takes 1,000 from that exchange, from the banish from Caius, and now the 2300 attack token will destroy the Armageddonite. We have a 2400 attack directly from Caius, and the 27 from Gorse that will bring Rob down to exactly 1,000. So really unfortunate for Rob that I drew the Caius there. I remember saying that the game would have been a lot different if I hadn't top decked there, but that's just the power of the Frog Monarch deck. There's a lot of good cards at top deck all the time. And with that Trooper and Frog coming back, you know, there's just so many cards. Diva, Caius, Ryza, Dark Dust Spirit, so many things that answer pretty much anything that can come flying off the top of the deck in succession over and over again. But Rob draws a card and then immediately picks up his grave and starts thinking, and he has Burial. Burial is just the insane card of the Vayu deck. Burial just like so powerful, just does so much, and it looks like he's putting back Plague Spitter, Zombie, Vayu, and Sirocco. Immediately removing the Vayu and Sirocco from the graveyard. Burial, just extremely powerful card in this format, and when you can basically get a Synchro monster out of it for free, out of the grave, is really strong. And now we have Plague Spitter again, so going for another 8, and we're going to see what he summons this time here. And it looks like Red Dragon Archfiend, so just being a big beater here. So initially Rob declares an attack on Gorse here, and but he quickly rescinds it after thinking for a second, because the ideal situation is that Rob's monster sticks around forever and just kind of walls the rest of Rob's stuff, the rest of my things on the left side, because he has the biggest monster in play. But what he figured out right after, and I let him take it back, of course, because, you know, it's a fun game, but he attacks the Caius because he's playing around the fact that I could have Swap Frog special summon to bounce the Caius and answer the Red Dragon Archfiend. So Rob, just a really intuitive play, just playing around, like playing to his outs, you know. But it looks like I have enemy controller anyway, and like I said, the deck just top decks so many different things. But I thought that was a really interesting play from Rob, taking down the Caius rather than the Gorse, because playing around Swap Frog and just kind of minimizing the amount of outs I could have. Unfortunately, the top of the deck did fairly well for me there in the end of that match, and that's about it, guys. Let me know what you guys thought about the gameplay in the comment section below. And without further ado, this is Dan V from SSG, signing out.